you've been with Deloitte Consulting for over 14 years now?
Around 15 years,
wow.
Yeah.
And prior to that, you were at PwC and BCG. Tell us a little bit about your career journey and how you got to where you are today.
I'm going to take you back before that, because I think that's really where my journey really started, was when I moved from Cleveland, Ohio to do my PhD in finance at Columbia Business School. And that's where the M&A journey really started. And you get through the coursework of a PhD program, and then you have to start looking at topics. And I started the program in 1988, and we were at the height of the 1980s merger wave. And it was the emergence of private equity, corporate raiders, and hostile takeovers, and there were full-page ads in the papers, regularly about this big deal and this hostile takeover. And so surrounded by M&A, and so M&A seemed to be sort of an interesting topic. And as a doctoral student, you really stand on the shoulders of giants that came before you, and that period of time was just this explosion of really interesting ideas. And if you don't mind, I'll go through some of them because they're all very connected. And as I thought about talking with you today, it sort of sent me back to what got me started. So out of the 1970s, and I'll be a little academic first, but out of the 1970s was, for me, out of the industrial organization economics literature, was contestability theory. What was the idea about contestability? And it was, if everyone had the same resources and all investments were easily reversible, you could hit and run any market. There'd be no excess returns. It'd be perfectly competitive or perfectly contestable markets. I'd said, oh, all right, so that means, and by the way, today we call that, when it's difficult to contest markets, we call it economic moats or strategic moats. That's the term, but it all comes from contestability theory. So I'm reading the industrial organization economics literature, and then comes along 1980 Michael Porter and competitive strategy. And what he did was he popularized the idea of industry structure. And then he comes 5 years later with competitive advantage, that companies have to look at their value chains. This is all happening during the 80s. It was also the time, was the rise of the shareholder value movement and discounted cash flow. And that was rapidly followed up in the 90s with economic value added and EVA and EVA leaders. So we had all this work on value. And also at the same time in M&A, you had the organizational behavior literature talking about culture clash, change management. Philip Mervis and Mitch Marks did the merger syndrome. So there was all these ideas going on. And then comes 1990, the core competence of the corporation, Gary Hamel and C.K. Prahalad. And then this book, still one of my favorite strategy books of all time, Commitment by Pankaj Gamawat. And the resource-based view of the firm, capabilities. So you have all these things that are sort of happening at the same time. And in finance, there was an explosion in M&A research. 1983, Journal of Financial Economics, which led to a flood of articles and research across lots of disciplines on event studies, like what happens to the share price of the acquirer on announcement. So all these things were kind of swirling around. And I'm sitting there as a doctoral student kind of taking this all in, and I'm going, something's missing. You have these separate literatures that don't really talk to each other on a problem that's clearly multi-divisional or multidisciplinary. And in a doctoral program, you're supposed to focus on one. And I just, like I said, I came from Cleveland, Ohio. I was just a bright-eyed kid. My dad was a traveling salesman. So, I'm looking at this and I'm trying to make sense of it all. And I started to ask a bunch of questions. The first one is, this is a game. Like you're paying up front for some distribution of outcomes in the future. There's a game being played. And then I started to ask, well, what really is overpayment? Because we talked about the winner's curse and the winning bidder overpays, but what does that mean? And what's the role of the acquisition premium when you pay more than anybody else in the world thought that already existing set of assets and technologies was worth? And I started to ask, well, what if these things we blame on culture or bad integration, what if these deals were dead on arrival? What if the price you were paying was so great and the performance improvements that were required were so great that nobody in industrial history could make it work? And I started to look at these connections. And then just the issue of market reactions. What does it mean if your share price goes up 10% or down 10% on announcement? What does that mean? Is this a good forecast? And then it was the issue of merger waves. What does it mean to be in a merger wave? what is, in economics we talk about merger waves as concentrations of M&A activity, but in reality they're waves of activity. What's going on in a merger wave? Is it the case that companies that hadn't been doing deals are now doing them? So you're injecting inexperience into the market? So that's really what got me going, and so I did my doctoral thesis on M&A performance, and that led to my first book 25 years ago, The Synergy Trap. So that's a little journey, and then I joined BCG, which was just a great place to innovate, and I got the chance to commercialize a lot of these ideas on M&A strategy, post-merger integration, structure, valuation, shareholder value, and learned a lot about consulting. I mean, I didn't know anything about consulting, so I learned the consulting craft, and then I had a chance at PwC to start a group from scratch, and so I built a deal strategy group there. And then I had the opportunity to join Deloitte going on 15 years ago, so that has stuck, and it's been really wonderful. But it was in a much bigger organization within a big consulting firm, launching an M&A strategy and commercial diligence practice.
So tell us a little bit more about that practice and your role as a partner.
Oh, sure, yeah. So, first of all, going into a big organization when you haven't even proved the concept is, you may have proved it someplace else, but you haven't proved it there. So it was pretty challenging for a while, and our natural channels were our M&A transaction services where they're doing financial diligence. And so it was, essentially how do we add M&A strategy, commercial diligence to things that they're already very successful at doing. But once we proved the concept, and then the floodgates started to open. And that was a good feeling. There was a lot of demand, and also when I got there, we didn't have any people. We had just a few people, a lot of smarts, but hadn't really done hardcore commercial diligence. And that bench grew, and that's probably been, for me, has been the most rewarding part of the last 15 years, is the young folks, people that I've had a chance to work with. They've just been terrific, whether it's on the actual client work, or I do recruiting at NYU, so my recruiting teams. It's been probably the most rewarding part to watch that practice grow and develop, and the talent just get better and better over the years.